It's a Friday at the Young Turks. You may drop it like it's hot. Oh, check it out. It's a super power panel today.
It is.
Yes, we got Brooke Thomas, we got Ashlee Marie Preston on the power panel to have some fun today. We already discussed this, but we're going to let everyone know. I missed, I'm not even going to call it purple. This is plum.
It's the plum. It is, It is what happens when you mix all the Kwanzaa colors together.
Yes. I mean, this is what happens when you mix an excellent power panel together.
That should have garnered a better, a heartier laugh. I'm not sure what's going on. Yeah. Okay.
Well, I was actually, because I was a nerd on these types of things. I was actually imagining the colors. I said, how would that come together? What color would that make? And as I was thinking about it,
I missed too late to laugh. It's okay. It's all right.
I still liked it. Fun times, everyone. Yeah, we do. So another Friday, you guys. Thank you for coming first of all, you guys. This is going to be a fun time. We always have lots of fun and interesting topics to talk about.
Yes.
Send all of your lovely comments to at hashtag TYT Live as you're watching with us. And also, if you have bad things to say, just keep it to yourself.
That's my rule on Twitter. Leave me alone. If you don't have anything overwhelmingly nice to say, leave me alone.
I don't know. I have a whole nother level of pettiness, so I welcome all of the criticism.
Can I send them your way?
Please, please by all means.
Sorry, it happened earlier.
The thing that happened behind the scenes today was that.
And it all matches for today. I like it.
It does. Are we getting ready to get started?
I think we should. Shall we do it?
All right, let's get started. So the debate was last night, a lot going on, and Senator and presidential candidate Kamala Harris has actually changed her tune a little bit on a major issue from last night's debate. She now says she does not support abolishing private health insurance in the United States, saying she misheard a question from NBC's moderators about Medicare for All during the presidential debate. And take a listen, because if you'll remember what happened, Lester Holt asked a question and a few answered.
Senator, on healthcare last night, you were asked to raise your hands, the entire panel, 10 of you, if you believe eliminating private insurance should be part of the Medicare for All proposal. You and Bernie Sanders both raised your hands. You've been asked and sort of clarified this question a couple of times over the course of the campaign. So once and for all, do you believe that private insurance should be eliminated in this country?
No.
You don't?
No, I do not.
But you raised your hand last night.
But the question was, would you give up your private insurance for that option? And I said yes.
Oh, I think you heard it differently than others then.
Probably, because that's what I heard.
Yeah, so she says that's what she heard. She heard it differently. We'll get into that in a second. But first, I want you to see the question, hear it, excuse me. I want you to watch and hear the question directly from Lester Holt and watch the reactions.
Who here would abolish their private health insurance in favor of a government-run plan? Yeah. All right.
Okay, so Bernie Sanders, Kamala Harris, and Joe Biden, awkwardly, I guess it could be technically seen as raising his hand. That happened at the end. Yeah. So that's what happened. And you heard her answer and her explaining, clarifying this morning. And I was talking to John Adirola about this, and he said that he sort of understood the question was confusing. Not necessarily talking about her answer, but just the question may have been seen as confusing or could have been clearer, because I guess one could say there's a difference between would you personally abolish your own personal health insurance for Medicare for All compared to would you abolish it for everyone? I think for me, the word abolish doesn't sound like something you would just do in your own personhood.
Right.
Abolish sounds like
definitely.
a law.
It sounds official. It definitely sounds official. And not only that, when they asked her to clarify her stance, she at the end said probably doesn't sound that sure. And not only that, the Washington Post sent out a survey about healthcare for all, and she did not reply to the request. And then on CNN, she had a different stance. And so really, I think what it boils down to—
Well, wait, stop right there. We have that CNN. We have a little bit of that, because exactly what you're pointing to is that there have been other moments where Kamala Harris has had to clarify her stance on Medicare for all, and specifically the aspect of private insurance. Here is a conversation that happened on a CNN town hall that she later had to clarify. Watch.
I believe it will totally eliminate private insurance. So for people out there who like their insurance, they don't get to keep it?
Well, listen, the idea is that everyone gets access to medical care. And you don't have to go through the process of going through an insurance company, having them give you approval, going through the paperwork, all of the delay that may require. Who of us has not had that situation where you got to wait for approval and the doctor says, well, I don't know if your insurance company is going to cover this? Let's eliminate all of that. Let's move on.
So you saw the question there was, will people who like their private insurance be able to keep it? And the end of her answer was, let's get rid of all of that. Let's move on. As far as issues one may have with their private insurance. That's at least how it was interpreted from a lot of people. Therefore, the next day, she went back on CNN to clarify.
Well, we were together,
yes.
And you'll remember, and roll the tape, please.
Yeah, we can roll the tape. Well, you support the Bernie Sanders bill, which essentially gets rid of insurance.
I support Medicare for all, but I really do need to clear up what happened on that stage.
Okay.
It was in the context of saying, let's get rid of all the bureaucracy. Let's get all of the ways.
Oh, not the insurance companies.
No, that's not what I meant. I know it was interpreted that way. If you watch the tape, I think you'll see that there are obviously many interpretations of what I said. What I meant is let's get rid of the bureaucracy. As it relates to Medicare.
Gets rid of insurance.
But no, it does not get rid of insurance.
So it's confusing. And as you mentioned, the Washington Post essentially kind of like broke down the question that was asked in the debate a little bit more. So saying, will you essentially get rid of private insurance in order to have Medicare for all?
I just saw her digging in her trick bag of courtroom antics. Like honestly, I saw. What do you think?
It's I guess I don't know if the right term is this, but legalese. You go through one word will change the difference, and it works to a degree because the abolish line also meant something different to me too. When I hear abolish your healthcare plan, it means not my personal one, abolish my plan for the country, right? And she's like, well, you know, I would abolish mine, but you said mine, so I'm thinking my own. But abolish sounds, it depends on how it is. So she also makes sure not to say also from May when she's clarifying from January, to make sure to say, well. Not that anyone was wrong, it was just misinterpreted or said incorrectly or what I meant. I understand you can mishear it. All these different things of not like you were wrong, I was right, this is what I meant, you didn't get it. So it's still, and it works. I'm reading it this deep into it, but I'm still going, okay, I'll give her that much. You were able to give her at least a 50% pass.
But here's the deal though, here's the deal. Why are they coming for Kamala so hard? That's a rhetorical question because the truth is that not too many of the candidates really understand what that would entail, what the plan would entail. It hasn't thoroughly been fleshed out enough. And so if you were to ask every single candidate on that stage, Biden, Bernie, even the one who proposed it, none of them would really have answers that were that well nuanced. And so I do think that by speaking to that topic, it's an opportunity to single people out and target people when in reality, no one really has enough information on it and they're just using it as a buzzword to reach the voter.
So the thing is, if I have a problem with the way Kamala Harris is approaching the healthcare issue, because she said she's part of it, what Bernie's plan is, she's on for it, and that was the last clarification from May was, I'm not into abolishing private healthcare because you still need it for things like plastic surgery or elective surgeries.
Technicality that it won't.
So, but it works to a degree.
It won't 100% get rid of private health insurance, but essentially you won't need it because what
they're
it
saying
supplements
that the
is things that every American won't.
But I'm a little bit nervous though because I'm also a member of the transgender community and I'm also living under an administration that feels that reproductive rights and trans, therapy that we need, that they get to decide whether we get it or not or how we get it.
They'll be deemed as elective.
Yeah, so it is kind of, there are some layers to that we do need to examine. Like, what does it mean that the federal government would have full control? What would some of those options look like? And so I think that it's definitely early to say how that would work, but I think that we do need to realize that it's not as black and white as we would.
And because it's early in the campaign process, because it's early, you have to try and make sure you appeal to all these people still. And then so that's the point of having folks in that may not think the way you do. So in having this conversation, because let's keep it real, they prepare for everything. They have pre-written lines. If I'm running for president and I'm preparing for this debate, I'm gonna have folks around me and I'm, okay, how is this gonna affect you? Oh, okay, Southerner, how's this gonna affect you? Hey, Northern white person, how's it gonna affect you? Hey, black guy from Kentucky, how's it going to affect you? I need everyone to know.
Campaign needs, all this money, lobbying. Like that is a huge, I wouldn't expect for the private insurance industry to go without a fight.
Yeah, no, I get that. Yeah. I think there's one sticking point for this for me is that this question, while I can understand that if it had been the first instance of this question, it could be confusing. But it was asked, same word for word, the night before, and had been widely discussed. Not only that, there were only 2 people the night before, Bill de Blasio and Elizabeth Warren, who did raise their hand. And they I think pretty clearly explained how they interpreted the question. And then it was talked about for 24 hours, which is part of the reason why it was asked again. So it's hard for me to believe that anyone at that point could be confused about the question. Enough to raise their hand if they didn't mean it.
So here's the question.
Am I being too hard on
No, I think the key operative is conversation.
Okay.
And I think what happens, in fact, isn't that like her tagline? Like, let's have a conversation.
Right.
The thing is that people aren't having a conversation. It's only people like Elizabeth Warren, and I swear, like full transparency, I'm not just saying that because I'm pro-Warren. It is that how many of these candidates are actually going into the community, not just doing meet and greets at their events, but actually sitting down and having private closed door meetings with the people who are being directly impacted by these policy proposals. And I don't think too many people are doing that. I think that they're relying on, not in a disrespectful way, the ignorance of the voter to not know what these policies or plans entail. And they're just trying to play on their emotional buy-in.
Yeah, so people that are gonna get deep into it will eventually get, as you said, the general voter will think, oh, this is too deep. I'm not sure the exact nature of this. You appeal to the broader voter, especially at this stage. So I guess in trying to figure out whether someone is being manipulative or straight up lying, I always ask, what is her motivation or potential objective for being misleading? Is it accidental? It's possible. Is it a well thought out plan to confuse everyone? That's possible too. So we have to determine, I guess every person has its own, the opportunity to do it. Man, is she trying to lie to us for a reason?
Right.
Because then that's part of the political game. We talk about how Republicans always say, hey, the Democrats out to get you, they want to kill you. And it's like, calm down.
Yeah.
Like, we need to be honest about what we think their motives are.
I don't think that she's out to lie to anyone. I think she's just trying to buy time and stave off the really complex, controversial issues until she can get her strong points up. And then I really do believe that if Kamala were to be elected, I think she would revisit it. I do. Right. But I think, again, it's all about optics and people trying to save face. And so we don't need a perfect politician. We just need an honest one.
Do you think her in office would be against Medicare for all, or at least a good enough version of it? That's the question.
I don't know, because I'm looking at past Kamala on criminal justice issues, so maybe I'm not the fair analyst for this one. But her past shows that she typically tends to go in the direction the wind blows. However, people do change, and so I give her space for that. I definitely applaud her for at least showing up to have the conversation and clarify it, whatever that looks like.
Well, moving on a little bit, this has, I guess you could say, dampened a little bit of what otherwise was a rock star night for Kamala Harris.
It was actually it was hurtful to hear you talk about the reputations of 2 United States senators who built their reputations and career on the segregation of race in this country. And it was not only that, but you also worked with them to oppose busing.
Yeah, and after this and Biden's kind of flub of an answer that we'll get back to in a bit, he spent all day today. He has spent all day trying to clarify his record on segregation. Watch this.
I heard and I listened to and I respect Senator Harris. But we all know that 30 seconds to 60 seconds on a campaign debate exchange can't do justice to a lifetime committed to civil rights. I want to be absolutely clear about my record and position on racial justice, including busing. I never, ever opposed voluntary busing. And as a program that Senator Harris participated in, and it made a difference in her life. I did support federal action to address root causes of segregation in our schools and our communities, including taking on the banks and redlining and trying to change the way in which neighborhoods were segregated. I've always been in favor of using federal authority to overcome state-initiated segregation. In fact, I cast a deciding vote in 1974 against an amendment called the Gurney Amendment, which would have banned the right of the federal courts to be able to use busing as a remedy. And you might guess, in the middle of the most extensive busing order in American history in my city, in my state, it wasn't what you'd call the most popular vote in the country at the time. It's a constitutional question to protect the civil rights of every single American. And that's always been my position.
So, and I think that that's a great thing to say. It is a constitutional right, constitutional, I think, responsibility to protect the civil rights of all Americans. So his answer last night after Kamala, one could say, held his feet to the fire, would be confusing if you compare it to what he said there. He was with Jayar Jackson, who you couldn't see, but I mean, that is just so transparent, But let's take a look at what he said last night during the debate. Okay, so she asked him what you all just saw, and then he kind of stumbled through it, and then she made him clarify, do you agree today that you were wrong to oppose busing in America then? And he says, I did not oppose busing in America. What I opposed is busing ordered by the Department of Education. That's what I opposed. I did not oppose, and he got kind of cut off, and so she points out, and you have it there, but you don't have to see it all at this point. She says there was a failure of states to integrate public schools in America. I was part of the second class to integrate Berkeley, California public schools almost 2 days after Brown versus Board of Education. And Biden jumps back in and says, because your city council made that decision. It was a local decision. And then here comes Harris with common sense. So that's where the federal government must step in. That's why we have the Voting Rights Act and the Civil Rights Act. That's why we need to pass the Equality Act. That's why we need to pass the ERA, because there are moments in history where states failed to preserve the civil rights of all people. And him saying what I opposed is busing ordered by the Department of Education. That is saying I oppose the federal government stepping in to protect the civil rights of Black Americans when states fail. That's what that means.
Point blank. And not only that.
And that hurt my feelings last night, just to hear any American say that on national television in 2019.
I'm even gonna simplify what makes this problematic for the folks that didn't go to school for a political science degree. Let's just go back to the basic part of that. He has used that same retired statement every time he's confronted with being problematic. I have heard you, I have listened, and I respect you. That's the same thing he said when he was held to the fire about invading women's boundaries and being handsy and touchy around the Me Too subject. And the other piece, and then he goes on to say, but. Whenever you say but, you just canceled out everything that you said previous to that. And when Kamala's sitting there telling you that she was of those children who were directly impacted, and for him to brush right over that, that is textbook gaslighting.
That's exactly what that is. And I don't understand who's advising him to not just say, I was wrong.
Every political advisor.
Wrong.
Every political advisor tells people to say not to say that.
This is absurd.
That's why last night Buttigieg, when he said I was wrong and it's a mess in South Bend, and some people saw that as a positive because he admitted to his fault in it and continuing fault in it. I think a lot of people saw that and went, man, he looks weak. Because if you say my bad, people see it as that way.
Well, we look at cancel culture and the way that like unfolds. And so like I think personally, even when Tulsi Gabbard, when they dragged her and were like, girl, you were anti-LGBTQ, you were all these things. And she stood there with that bone structure and just like looked and was like, yeah. And I've moved on and then move on. I think that again, if we can't trust you to take accountability, we can't trust you to represent us in the White House.
Completely agree. And sometimes your past actions are so strong that regardless of how you answer, you cannot and should not be president of the United States.
Talk about how it's happened.
Listen, with Pete Buttigieg, everyone, the facts are there. There are race relations issues in South Bend, and him as the leader of that city is failing at that. He's failing at that when it comes to managing his police department. He's failing at that when it comes to his relationship with the community. That's already the facts. That's already there. So whether he admits to it or not, he is not ready to be president of the United States of America.
But I think
last night I just felt like, oh, I'm glad you see what we see. My answer, you know what I mean? He didn't make it worse for himself. He made it better that he's at least not delusional, but I don't think many Black Americans in South Bend ever thought this was the man that has the experience and has the perspective to lead the country.
Well, I think what it is that for some of the Gen Zers and maybe like younger millennials, they know Uncle Joe, who was VP to Barack Obama, the first black president. But I remember Joe Biden, who was in a video talking about the crime bill and the war on drugs and talking about thugs and pretty much telling Bush Sr. that he should butch it up basically and grow a pair and that he wasn't being tough enough. And so I think that video, that 2-minute video that you can Google and find on YouTube encapsulates a lot of his attitudes and opinions, but you could even find instances that are more recent about Joe Biden's feelings on race in America. And so like, I think he's been expecting to get a pass because he's given us political blackface by hiding behind President Barack Obama's presidency, when in reality, that doesn't, I feel, it's very harmful in social media. They made him into a meme. Yeah. And so it's kind of created this soft, you wanna say something about it?
This whole episode, I think, highlights his political career. It's, a lot of times it's talk versus actions. So he talked about how he was trying to target the root of the problem with segregation and all that. But he talked about how great it was that he works with segregationists and a racist, well-known, all that stuff. So when you look to work with and highlight how well it is that you worked across the aisle with horrible people, what you're gonna do, especially as Democrats, is you give things away. That's the part that they don't point out. If you're working across the aisle with Mitch McConnell, you're giving something away that the American people don't want, because Mitch McConnell does not work for the American people. So if you're working with segregationists, you're giving away something to segregationists that black folks at the time in any point in history don't want, because they don't work towards black folks. They hate them. So when you say, hey, I'm working with them, the hurtful part is that you're giving something away. Even though maybe in your heart, you were trying to target the root of the problem by voting against this one thing that's gonna stop it, but then allowing the a-holes that are in the local communities to do what they're doing, you're kind of just spinning the wheels and saying, hey, I tried, but I'm not really doing it. Hey, black folks, I'm trying. But these horrible people keep doing it. They're acting, you're talking. Who gets hurt? The people do. That's the basis for how long it's been. I'm sure Joe Biden doesn't hate black people. That's how Kamala started last night. She goes, I don't think you're racist, but I also don't think he cares enough to hurt the feelings of bad people to get things done for better people.
I'm glad that you pointed that out, that it's unfortunate that when a black American wants to talk about race, they have to make sure to assure the public and to assure the person that they are criticizing that they're not calling them a Klan member. You know what I mean? That is just, it's more emotional abuse.
But then sometimes too, I'm sorry, there's a time when you need to call a racist. And I think this is one of the reasons why personally the political sphere has always been a challenging space to occupy, because I'm not the one. I do not have time to prioritize your feelings over my suffering. That is the textbook definition of oppression. And so I think that, yes, it may not necessarily indicate that he is a racist. However, if you are protecting and helping preserve racist spaces and supporting people who have the power to enforce those ideologies at a federal level, then you are an accomplice.
It's like when people voted for Trump, they said, hey, I voted for him. I didn't vote for him because he's a rabid racist. I voted for him because he said the right things about the economy and thinking about the lost guy. I said, so you thought those things, heard the racist things, and still voted for him. That means you were able to let the racist things go.
Well, you're also referring to the fiscal conservative. And so the issue with fiscal conservatives is that they do not believe there's a direct correlation between economics and social justice. And so I think that one of my biggest opportunities has been trying to, for those who are willing to work across the aisle, is trying to get them to understand that the two are connected, starting with slavery as the most obvious example. If you look at American history, somebody always had to take the shorter stick in order for the wealthy class or the 1% to continue to thrive.
Sure. All right, so is it break time? I think it's break time. I think we're gonna take a quick break and we'll be right back. We have lots more to get to. Ashlee Marie Preston, Jayar, me hanging out. I'm glad to be here with y'all.
I love it.
We hope you're enjoying this free clip from the Young Turks. If you want to get the whole show and more exclusive content while supporting independent media, become a member at tyt.com/join today. In the meantime, enjoy this free segment.
Hey there, welcome back to the Young Turks. Thank you for watching and staying with us here. I'm Brooke Thomas, here with Jayar Jackson and Ashlee Marie Preston. I'm so happy to be here with both of you. I think this just makes me happy.
You were so happy that you even wore the same color.
We wore the same color, exactly. We coordinated. It's like Destiny's Child. Our Michelle over here didn't get the memo. It's fine.
I can't sing either.
She can sing. She's the best. I mean, not the best, but she's a great singer.
That's why the solo career was awesome.
Oh my goodness. All right, so I'm gonna read some member comments and DYT Live. So this is my first time doing this too, so bear with me as I look in the wrong camera. Okay, Anja says, at least she clarified straight away rather than after the primaries. And Ignoratio Alinci says, oh, good grief, it wasn't that hard to understand the question. It's what she wants to say to pander to both progressives and the establishment. Hashtag playing both sides. And then on Twitter, Other95 says, supposedly supporting universal health care and keeping private insurance is a sure sign that someone doesn't understand the financial pressures the healthcare system is under. Hashtag do the math.
She's too smart to not understand it.
Yeah, you think so? You still think it's?
I think they called it, no, they just spoke right to what I was saying, is that it's what a lot of candidates do. They're trying to appeal to as many bases as possible, but with this election, there is no straddling the fence. No one gets to play Switzerland or stand by. Like, you have to take a strong stance on it. And I think that those candidates who are going to be successful are those who draw a clear line.
Completely understandable. All right, let's get to our next story, because today actually is the 50th anniversary of when Marsha P. Johnson threw the first brick at Stonewall Inn. And this, of course, launched the modern day fight for LGBTQ rights. And I think we have a picture of Marsha P. Johnson and Sylvia Rivera. I love this picture. I love this picture, and a lot more people are gonna learn who these two women are, because you may know already that Bill de Blasio announced plans for a monument honoring Johnson and Sylvia Rivera there. And just have a couple quotes I want to read you. This coming out of New York, Marsha P. Johnson and Sylvia Rivera were defining revolutionaries for transgender rights and racial justice here in New York City and across the country. And this is from Carmelyn P. Malalis. She works for the city government in New York City. Also saying this memorial honoring their legacies could not have come at a more prescient time as the federal government rolls back protections for transgender people and violence towards transgender people grows nationwide. Our city is celebrating our trans communities and doubling down on our commitment to protect them. And now this permanent public monument honoring transgender women, it's gonna be the first of its kind in the world. It's 2019, but I guess one could say you have to start somewhere, but it is 2019. One more thing I wanna let you know. The Marsha P. Johnson Institute is opening their first office in the home of Marsha P. Johnson. I want to show you something, because there's a hashtag going around on Twitter. You should go search it, because there's some really cool information there. A lot of people getting involved, but it's hashtag Reclaim Marsha. And back on the Institute here, they are fundraising to meet a $20,000 goal to open this office for the national movement to help elevate, support, and nourish the voices of Black trans people. I know we've had you on to talk multiple times about the violence against Black trans women currently, today, in 2019.
I can feel my petty percolating right now.
Really?
Because when we talk about that violence, we don't talk about the violence that comes from LGBT Inc. Because I mean, LGBT Inc. is pretty much these large organizations who like to screen trauma porn that pertains to Black trans women to rake in donor dollars, but we don't actually see any of the benefit from those dollars. And then when you have community leaders like Elle Hearns, who is the one who founded Marsha P. Johnson, the Marsha P. Johnson Institute, and people like me, we get silenced. Even when I worked in what I now refer to as the nonprofit industrial complex, I was only one paycheck away from being in the same demographic that I served. And so when there were things that were unethical that were happening to clients who were coming for services, I wasn't able to advocate for them the way that I wanted to. So basically, we like to use Black and brown bodies and faces and voices to puppet our meaning LGBT Inc., our thoughts and ideologies, but when it comes to actually prioritizing us, we are not a priority. So I am definitely all for people really standing behind empowerment.
Right.
I think there is a conflation of saviorism versus empowerment. Saviorism is reinforcing your own supremacy by giving us just enough breadcrumbs to survive, but not really putting us in a position of leadership so that we can make informed decisions that are going to help us thrive and empower us.
Is the monument a breadcrumb in the city of New York?
I think it's a beautiful gesture.
Okay.
It is a beginning, but it most certainly is a breadcrumb when we look at the fact that on an average, our life expectancy is only 35 years old. And then we see in the community that gay white men still are leading the conversation around what it is that the community needs. And so we're not talking about racism. We're not talking about sexism. We're not talking about transphobia because we're allowing those individuals to use their sexuality as a shield. And so it is no surprise that Marsha P. Johnson and Sylvia Rivera were the fierce warriors that they were, because your fiercest warriors are going to be the ones who have nothing to lose but life itself. And so we got to see their experiences at the intersection of race, gender, and socioeconomic disparity. They were sex workers. And so they would go out, turn some tricks, and then they would get a hotel room or an apartment, and the LGBT kids who were kicked out of their homes for being who they were in the late 60s and 70s, they would house them so that they didn't have to enter the prison industrial complex, so that they didn't have to risk their lives engaging in sex work, and so they didn't have to feel, they didn't have the love and warmth that any individual would need to go out and make the best lives for themselves.
When you hear these stories about, because it's been said a lot, but these stories about how the LGBTQ community is sometimes the most economically free or the most affluent, because generally they have fewer kids and there's less worries. Like I remember when they said there's ads, like Ford started doing ads and they're accepting of the community more. And then so that becomes the veneer, what you may think is the case. But then you hear some stories about the economic hardships that many folks have. And then I think it's subconscious, since you hear about that so hard, and like, oh, I feel so good that we're accepting folks that we previously hated, because we're in our bubble, because many parts of the country don't. But we accept that. So then those instances of the economic hardships must only be a few.
Well, let me paint that picture for you. So in 2017, I've talked about this before, the buying power within the LGBTQ community was at $917 billion. And then in 2018, it went over $1 trillion. But for a trans woman of color on a national average, we make less than $10,000 a year. So how is it that we have that much wealth in a community that still continues to let trans women of color, more specifically Black trans women, scrape the gutters, scrape the bottom? It's because there is no intentionality about prioritizing our suffering, because once we were able to lift kind of like the barrier of being gay, a lot of gay white men now have the full access and full benefits of patriarchy that a cis hetero wealthy white man would have. And so I think for me, my biggest opportunities to build allyship and most of my support, quite honestly, has come from people like y'all. It's actually come from people outside of the LGBTQ community, because what people don't realize is that this, again, trauma porn, there's an industry for it. And so if we don't have these tragic stories about our murders, and we're not talking about the homelessness and all of these things that are going to continue raking in donor dollars so we can keep our doors open and our lights on, we're not going to be able to wield this power. And so I think that what I've been recommending to my LGBTQ siblings is get outside of that silo. Come over to the other side. The weather over here is lovely. There are people who are for us, who do support us, who don't exploit us. And quite frankly, there have been some LGBTQ media outlets who have helped amplify voices like mine and others. But to be honest, they fear me. I'm kryptonite, because I am there to pull the covers on all of it. It's just this mental, there are so many mental gymnastics and mind games that are being played, and it's oppressive. And so what is depressing is here we are 50 years later, and we're still looking at the same dynamics. There's a video of Sylvia Rivera from 1973 when she's on stage talking about her experiences in prison. She said that she had had her nose broken. She was kicked out of her home for being trans. She was homeless on the streets and all of these things. And they had the audacity to boo her off of a stage that she helped build. And so I think it goes back to this idea that yes, we're accepting and we're embracing, but what's in it for you? Because I feel like with a lot of the corporations who participate in rainbow capitalism, you're only putting in money because you think you're going to get money back. But when it comes to the community that you feel can do nothing for you, let's see where your efforts go then.
Speaking of the rainbow, what did you call it?
Rainbow capitalism.
Did you know Donald Trump is selling, the Trump campaign is selling rainbow t-shirts?
Lord.
I didn't know that.
Terrific.
Remember when he wrote that?
The tweet, we were talking about that.
When the LGBT, he held up a tattered LGBT flag and like written in like marker like Trump, LGBTQ loves Trump or something like that when he was running.
I don't even remember that.
I do. It was, yeah.
All right. It's great having you here. And she's still gonna be here and stick around.
Yeah.
But we're gonna take a quick break and we'll be right back.